So I'd like to go on to introduce the next person who's presenting, and that's Ashley Harling, who's a certified speech pathologist, passionate about communication access for all, and has been working in Indigo, which is formerly the Independent Living Centre in Western Australia since June 2018. So that's allowed her to grow her passion for AAC and helping adults and children find their voice. So Ashley has attended her Keyword Sign Presenter course in Perth and is still regularly delivering training and coaching on communication and AAC technology. So welcome, Ashley. I'm just, yay. There you are. So great to see you. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I would like to also acknowledge everyone who is joining from this side of the country. If you joined for the keynote, you would have been up at about 5:30 a.m. So welcome, everyone. And just wanted to acknowledge that commitment from everyone from around Australia, wherever you're joining from. So I'm going to present. If you just give me a moment to get that happening. Here we go. Cool. Is that coming up for everyone?
Yep, we can see that. Perfect.
Awesome. So what I was hoping to present today was just around the use of keyword sign with adults. There can be, it is a really, really valuable strategy to use with children, and sometimes what I found with some of the resources is that it often tends to skew a little bit to the kids, and that can sometimes lead people to believe that it's just a strategy for children. And I work with different adults. I work with supporters of adults who can and do benefit from the use of keyword sign. And so what I was hoping to do today was just kind of, if you're a presenter or if you're learning or if you support someone who uses or an adult with keyword sign, just some ideas on how to do that in a bit of a age appropriate way, I guess, but also different things to consider when supporting people who do support adults. So with, I guess, looking at, always like the different learning models, but when we're looking at adults, we're really thinking about how can we make, because we're not only teaching the individuals, but we're also teaching the people who support them. So we're looking at really that logical information, making sure that they're active when they're learning, plenty of opportunities to practice, and really make it engaging, relatable, and giving them lots of opportunities for success. And definitely hearing that from lots of the other presentations today. If we can make it relatable and engaging for someone, that's going to be really important for their learning. Not just for our signers, but also for the people supporting them. One of the things that I'm frequently coming up against, well, not coming up against, but frequently coming across, is that a lot of adults who do use sign before maybe they have already used sign before, they may develop over the course of their life unique signs and gestures, and that might be just because of their own particular motor skills, or it might be what gets taught. Keyword sign, it hasn't been around for forever, and so often people are coming with lots of different variety of things that they do. And one of the things that I really like to reinforce if I'm presenting, but also when I'm supporting people to use signs outside of that workshop perspective, is I never really want to force individuals to sign the way that I want them to. And if they use a particular sign, then if they want to continue using the sign that way, then I don't mind. I also want to reinforce that. Well, I want people to. Some of the things that I do is coach people on how to reinforce the communication attempt and acknowledge the message of the individual. Adults can, potentially they've got a lot of experience with communication failure. And one of the big things that I try and convey when I'm working with people who support adults is making sure that we can get as much communication success as possible, because we don't want to be adding to that communication failure, potentially 20, 30 years of communication failure. We want to inject as much success as possible. And even if people are using their own unique signs, I typically encourage people to use the accurate signs themselves, the same way that we would recast and model good language models when we're looking at younger children. This is not just for the individuals themselves, but for anyone else around them. So if I know that an individual uses a particular sign for a particular word, and there is a sign for that, I want to help other people learn the accurate signs, but also reinforce that message. So even if, not forcing someone to use the different signs, but using signs accurately so that they may choose to change, or they may, or it might help everyone else around them. One of the big things that I remember from the presenter training was, and even my own keyword sign workshop that I was doing, was the use of role play. And I really want to acknowledge that role play can be a really, really valuable form of active learning. It supports people to think about the skills that they're applying, and can be a really nice alternative to passive participation in things. I don't know if it was my own reluctance to join in the dramatizations, but I know that I particularly found role play to be very, very challenging for me. I really disliked, stepping into that that play role, and was finding that as a less outgoing person, that actually a lot of my cognitive energy was focused on the role play rather than the skills that I was learning. So, and that is something that, just through a lot of feedback from participants in the different workshops, was that the role play was really, really challenging. And I started thinking about how can we still practice the skills, still be thinking about using AAC, or not AAC, but how can we think about using keyword sign in those everyday activities, practice using those skills, but without that extra cognitive effort from potentially those less outgoing people who might find role play really challenging. Because if you're working with adults, it's not something that you often do. You don't get down, and you're often not getting down and playing. So a lot of those role playing activities that we kind of talk about and use aren't always applicable. So I started trying to think about how can I be modifying my workshop to help capture some of those other people. I love the signing in songs, and I wanted to just show you briefly how I do some modifications to that. And I think I do try and include it wherever possible. People often do groan a little bit when we're talking about signing in songs, but it's great fun. There's lots of rhythm. There's lots of repetitive language, even in more adult songs, and I like it in a way, as a way to talk about the flexible use of signs. So songs contain lots of huge varieties of language, and we can start thinking about what is the message behind this, and what sign can we use that we already know. And often signs are full of known language. So especially if it's a quite catchy song, people already know the words, so they're not necessarily having to think up new ones. although I do get quite a mix, and sometimes some songs that I think people would know, people have never heard before. It is quite challenging to find songs that are do have a good concentration of vocab, but the songs that I have used frequently and I do quite like are Katy Perry's Roar, which I did not know that the previous presentation would be talking about. If you're looking around Christmas, a lot of Christmas songs are actually really, really great. A lot of mainstream Christmas songs are actually really great. Yeah. So an example of how I've done that is if we take Katy Perry's Roar, we can talk about the use of natural gesture. A lot of people do like to do actions to songs, even if they don't know the words. So I really like talking to people about how we can incorporate that natural gesture into the signs that we're doing. And an example of how we can think about the meaning of the lyrics and how they apply to the maybe signs that we already know is an example of in the second verse, I think. Get ready because I've had enough. Start talking about, what does that mean? And when someone says I've had enough, what they, I'm finished. So can we think about using the sign finished for, yep, we've had enough, yep, we're finished now. So thinking about how we can incorporate some of those signs that we already know. It is also a really good opportunity to talk to people about how many signs they might be using in their in a sentence or in a phrase, because the great thing about songs is it just moves on. That it doesn't wait for you. You can't do a really weird lots of breaks in between your words. So talking about how many signs we can be thinking about including. So that's just an example of how I've used Katy Perry's Roar. The big thing that I like talking to people is activity planning. So throughout my workshops, I will, and when I'm talking to people, I will talk about the use of that kind of word of the week or a word focus. So we've got a word and how can we use it across a huge range of times during the day. But what I found really helpful also is activity planning. So thinking about not just a single word, but thinking about a focused activity and really bombarding that activity with lots of signs. And that can be a nice way to incorporate both, or it can be a nice pairing to a keyword sign of the week, also having a bit of a focus of an activity. And so what I'm doing with that one is instead of doing like a play-based activity, what I try and do is get people to think about an activity that they do with the people that they work with. And some things that people often do is, regardless of whether you work with kids or adults, is everyone eats. Everyone can be involved in reading, whether that's a magazine, whether that's a newspaper, whether that's a book. Everyone is engaged in community activities. Everyone's engaged in self-care, personal care. Everyone transitions between activities. So I try and use those generic kind of activities so that people can start thinking about, oh, well, I work with someone who eats or is involved in meal times. I can start to incorporate these. Or, oh, the person that I work with enjoys reading. We can read rather than just reading books or playing with pretend toys, engaging in pretend activities. What I try and do is challenge people to make comments because I really like using this as an opportunity to discuss the real imbalance of questions and comments within conversations with people with complex communication needs, and the importance of thinking actively about using more comments wherever possible. And I think try and get people to think about using words that can be used at any time or any time that activity happens. So rather than just when we're, cooking butter chicken, but also any time that we're eating, any time that we're breaking for meals. And I find this a really nice opportunity to get people to start thinking about using the signs and using their own language. And I have found a much higher, much more engagement in the planning and the planning activities when people don't have to worry about the added cognitive effort of, playing and performing that interaction. So it has been a really positive change, I think, especially when I'm working with people who are going to be supporting adults. A lot of what I take, I really value the Assistiveware Core Word Classroom because it can be a really helpful tool from, and it's kind of where I took a lot of the ideas from the different activities, but also this activity in general. And getting people to think about both core words and potentially some fringe words as well. This gives people an opportunity to think about all sorts of different language functions. And this is what I will give people as an example. I will give people an example of the sign and a sentence that includes that sign. So that's kind of what I give people to help produce it. And that's kind of the end of that. It is I'm happy to take questions, or if anyone has any comments, I'm happy to
So
do that.
We've got about 2 minutes left. So if people want to just raise their hand if they've got a question that you think might have be answered in 2 minutes. Thanks very much. That was great, Ashley. Anyone there got any questions?
No. Oh, hand up from Tina.
I was really clear. I have no questions.
Ashley, I'd like to ask what you do for the adults that you support who have signs that are different to the signs that are currently being used now. I know that you said that you model the correct sign back to them, but do you document their use of sign at all?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Wherever possible, trying to use a bit of a communication dictionary for them. If they do have access to technology, one of my colleagues actually had some little QR codes that she developed so that people could access them on the phone and have the video. I'm not at that point, but it's something that I've constantly got in the back of my head. So yeah, some sort of communication dictionary, whether that's printed or electronic.
Great question, Tina, and great response. I think, and QR codes are a very interesting concept. I think there's opportunities to explore how they can actually